In this video, I'm going to run through some essential tips to help you get started in Tainted Grail, the Fall of Avalon. We're going to start with some information on character creation, builds and leveling, then we're going to move on to cover the basics of combat, questing, crafting, exploration and much more. So stay till the end to learn everything you need to know to get the smoothest start in this game. Let's start with some tips around character creation. Well, first of all, there's only one playable race in the game right now, human, and there are no racial bonuses or other considerations that you need to make while creating your character. It's purely an aesthetic choice. However, once you create your character and load into the game world, you will almost immediately be presented with two choices that will help to define your build, though in a fairly minor way. Basically, through the dialogue that you have with your prison warden as soon as you enter the game, you're given the option to select two different playstyle bonuses. And these bonuses will give you an initial boost to certain skills depending on which bonuses you select. My advice is not to agonize over these. Yes, it would be better to select skills based on the type of build that you want to go with, but the reality is you haven't played the game yet and there's a solid chance that you're going to want to chop and change. Well, the good news here is that much like in Skyrim, you can level any skill at any time simply by using that skill. So while these initial playstyle bonuses are helpful in the early game, any character is able to eventually max out any skill. There are also ways to reset your skills, so I really wouldn't worry too much about this decision. The game is clearly designed for you to explore different skills rather than railroading you down a certain path. However, the one situation in which these playstyle bonuses could have a fairly major impact is if you're playing the game on a higher difficulty setting and you're struggling to survive the very early stages of the game. So let's talk about difficulty for a moment. I'd suggest, based on my experience, that normal difficulty presents a reasonable level of challenge for the average player who isn't planning to spend a great deal of time on maximizing their build. However, if you're a seasoned RPG player, then as your build starts to come together with some carefully selected items and perks, then you may start to find that normal difficulty isn't offering you the level of challenge that you're looking for. If this sounds like you, I'd suggest that you consider playing on hard, as that's more likely to give you the challenge you're seeking. There are also 4 other difficulty settings. You have story mode and easy mode, which are great if you just want to relax and not really have to make any effort when it comes to combat. Then you have survival, which only allows you to save at certain locations, and hardcore, which is the mode that deletes your save file if you die. Pretty brutal, but if you're crazy enough to play that, then more power to you. Once you've created your character, selected your difficulty setting and picked your starting bonuses, you're pretty much thrown straight into the game. At this point, I'd suggest that you loot the prison guard who was killed in the opening sequence in order to get their basic weapons and armor, as before long you're going to find yourself in combat. So let's talk a bit about how the various types of combat work in the game. Melee combat is fairly simple, but also immensely satisfying in my opinion. The first thing to know is that you can equip weapons to both your left and right hands, meaning that you can dual wield as well as having the ability to pair weapons with shields and magical abilities. More on magic in tip number 5. These weapons, shields or spells will be bound by default to your left and right mouse buttons. When it comes to melee combat, tapping your left mouse button will perform a light attack and holding it down will charge up a heavy attack. You also have the ability to block by holding down the right mouse button and the ability to parry an enemy and stagger them slightly by tapping the right mouse button just as their attack connects. However, you won't be able to block or parry if you have a spell equipped in your offhand, as your right mouse button will then be used to cast that spell instead. And finally, you can also dodge enemy attacks by pressing the Alt key. Probably the most important thing to realize when it comes to melee combat is that all of the actions that I just listed drain your stamina, so it's really important to carefully manage this resource, especially in the early game when it's in short supply. When it comes to ranged combat, it plays out pretty much exactly as you'd expect. You hold down your left mouse button to draw your bowstring back, and then you release the left mouse button in order to release your arrow. You can also zoom in slightly by holding down the right mouse button, which also means that you cannot parry or block with a bow. As with melee combat, the most important detail of ranged combat is tied to how you use your stamina. As long as you have your bowstring pulled back, your stamina will continue to drain, which means that you don't get to spend forever aiming your shot. And if you attempt to take a shot with no stamina, then you won't be able to draw your bowstring back a sufficient distance and your arrows will just drop uselessly a few feet in front of you. So once again, you need to manage your stamina effectively. The other thing to note is that arrows are subject to gravity and they'll arc after you fire them, so as a result you'll need to aim slightly above the heads of further away targets. The final and probably most complex form of combat in the game is magic. And when I say complex, that's largely due to the awesome variety of spells available to you. Spells are much the same as one-handed melee weapons in the sense that they can be equipped to both your left and right hands, giving you the ability to dual wield spells or combine them with weapons and shields. And you'll be able to perform different versions of the spell depending on whether you tap or hold down the mouse button that corresponds to the hand in which you have that spell equipped. Now when it comes to spells, it's not as simple as light and heavy attacks, and different spells do different things depending on whether you're quickly firing out that spell in quick succession or charging it up by holding down the mouse button. For this one, you're just going to need to experiment with the spells available to you, as going through every single spell is a bit beyond the scope of this quick tips video. By the way, rather than learning spells as you do in many other games, in Tainted Grail, spells are simply items that you can just find and equip in the exact same way as you equip any other weapon. It's also worth mentioning that there is an additional type of magical weapon available in the game that comes in the form of a magical item rather than a spell. I'm showing one on the screen right now. Now these magical items can be equipped just like any normal spell, however they work very differently. Basically, they need to be charged up by you performing a certain activity as specified on the item's tooltip. In this case, the item's charged by dealing damage to enemies, and once it's fully charged, it will give you the ability to unleash a powerful spell that will stagger your enemies as well as increasing the damage you deal to them by 33%. Honestly, the existence of these items just take the magic system to a whole other level, and it just adds to the incredible depth and variety of character builds you can come up with in this game. Now of course, after getting into a few scrapes using these combat skills, you're going to gain some experience and level up. So let's talk briefly about how leveling works. Well, it's pretty simple really. You have your main character level and then you have your individual skill levels, and in this case one doesn't impact the other as it does in Skyrim for example. For your individual skill levels, they'll simply level up as you use that skill and will in turn increase your proficiency in said skill, and you really don't have to do anything outside of making sure that you use the skills that you want to focus on as often as possible. Then when it comes to your overall character level, it's the standard system of gain experience by doing certain activities, and once you accumulate enough experience, you'll level up. And in Tainted Grail, you gain experience by doing pretty much anything: killing, quests, exploration, crafting, etc, etc. However, once you receive the notification that you've leveled up, there is an additional step that you need to take to actually complete the leveling process. You'll need to set up a campfire, interact with it, and select the level up option in order to spend the attribute and perk points that you've just gained for this new level. Let me explain how attributes and skills work in a little more detail, as this is where you'll find the core of your build. Firstly, you have 6 core attributes: strength, endurance, dexterity, spirituality, practicality, and perception. And each time your character levels up, you'll be given a single point to spend in one of these attributes. Each attribute offers certain bonuses for each point you spend in them. For example, you can see here that adding a point to spirituality will offer a 1% increase to your magical damage, as well as an increase to your maximum mana and your mana regeneration. These attributes also each govern a subset of the game's available skills, and you can see here that each attribute has a number of skill trees assigned to it. Every time your character levels, as well as gaining 1 attribute point, you'll also gain a point to spend in one of these skill trees. And the combination of these attribute and skill points, alongside the weapons, armors, and spells that you choose, will make up your character's build. As you can see, there's a huge amount of depth, and you're not railroaded down any particular path, so you can get pretty creative. Speaking of weapons and armor, it's worth taking a quick look at how attributes impact your ability to fully utilize them. In very basic terms, many of the weapons and armor that you'll find in the game will require a certain level in a particular attribute, or sometimes even multiple attributes to be able to use that item effectively. If you don't possess the required attribute level, then you'll see, with a weapon for example, that the damage that you can deal with that weapon will be reduced, and you won't benefit from any of the weapon's special effects. This is one of those remember to read the small print moments, as the game will still actually allow you to equip items even if you don't have the required attributes. So if you don't pay proper attention, you could easily equip an item and not even realize that you're not getting its full potential. That brings us on to crafting, which I'm not going to go into any massive detail on, as this is a quick tips video and crafting is a fairly in-depth subject. However, at a very basic level, what you need to know is that there are 4 different crafting skills in the game: cooking, alchemy, fishing, and handcrafting, which allows you to make items such as weapons and armor. And these skills are all grouped together in the same skill tree that's governed by the practicality attribute. This is pretty neat as it means that multiple crafting skills can benefit from unlocking perks in the same skill tree. To level up each of your crafting skills, you simply need to use them as with any other skill, and crafting is performed at crafting stations that can be found in settlements and various other locations in the world, including your own campfire if you have certain perks unlocked in the crafting skill tree. This is of course with the exception of fishing, and if you can't work out where fishing takes place, then I don't think anything that I say can help you. Speaking of crafting, you are of course going to need materials and ingredients, and I have one simple piece of advice here which I give for pretty much every RPG under the sun, and that is to loot absolutely everything you come across that looks like it might be an ingredient. There are shed loads of ingredients to be found all over the world, and by looting everything you find, when it comes to leveling up your crafting, you're going to have a decent stockpile of ingredients to use rather than having to go through the miserable grind of running around farming them. Of course, you will need to watch your carry capacity, which is displayed in the top right of your inventory screen, and word of warning here, some items in this game are obscenely heavy. For example, I looted a stone sword that weighed almost 100 kilos, which was pretty much my entire carry capacity. You'll know pretty quickly if you're over encumbered, as you'll start to move at the pace of a snail with severe asthma. There is a solution to this, however, as you can access a storage chest in town completely free of charge, and that's going to allow you to dump your excess materials. So just remember to fast travel back to town every so often in order to take advantage of this and not end up having to waste your ingredients by being forced to dump them in the middle of a dungeon run because you've become over encumbered. Whilst we're on the subject of fast travel, it's also worth talking about how fast travel actually works in Tainted Grail. Basically, you can only fast travel between set fast travel points and from your campfire, providing you fuel it with ethereal cobwebs. Basically, you're going to need to plan your fast travel a little more carefully than you might do in other games such as Skyrim, as you can't just open a map and click on a location to instantly travel there. I actually prefer this system, to be honest, as it forces you to actually traverse the game world and do a little bit more exploration. Speaking of traversing the world, you don't have to do it all on foot, and you can very easily get your hands on a horse by travelling to this location that I'm now showing on the map, defeating the enemies around the horse, and then stealing the horse to claim it as your own. Once you've claimed the horse, from that point onwards you'll be able to summon it by using the quick menu and make use of it when exploring the open world. Which leads neatly into my next tip, which is simply to explore. This might not be the biggest open world we've seen in an RPG, but it more than makes up for its lack of scale by being absolutely jam-packed with meaningful and engaging content. It's actually incredible how such a small studio has seemingly achieved what so many AAA studios seem to fail to do these days. They've created a world in which you just cannot help but explore, because every time you do, you're rewarded with an interesting discovery. For example, I swam down to the bottom of this weird blood-filled lake and I actually stumbled upon a door that led to this awesome little mini dungeon, complete with its own storyline, 2 boss fights, and a ton of useful loot. And if I hadn't randomly decided just to swim to the bottom of the lake and see what was there, I would never have found it. Which leads me on to a related tip actually. Don't ignore side quests in this game. They're not your typical side quests in which you perform some mundane task for an ungrateful NPC in order to pad out your golden experience before progressing the main quest. Side quests in Tainted Grail actually offer some really unique and fun objectives, some great characters, storytelling, really good voice acting actually even for the side quests, and of course many exciting rewards to get your hands on. On the subject of storytelling, there are a lot of branching narratives in this game, and what that means is that the choices that you make genuinely matter. You can impact how quests play out quite significantly with your own actions, so another tip is to really consider the different ways in which you might approach a quest or NPC interaction. It's not a game where you're going to want to simply brute force your way through everything, and if you do, you're probably going to miss out on a lot of stuff that the game has to offer, especially from a narrative perspective. This leads neatly into my penultimate tip, which is to be very careful who you kill. This game does allow you to actually kill some important characters, or at the very least relevant characters, and it's not always 100% obvious who the important characters are. So always explore options that are outside of simply going in guns blazing, as more often than not there will be multiple ways of approaching a situation. If you kill an enemy and see the option to execute them come up as they're lying on the floor, you've probably killed someone that has some form of story relevance, and by doing so you may have permanently closed the door on certain options and events. Finally, tip number 20 is to beware of the night. In Tainted Grail, when night falls, the weirdness takes over and possesses enemies in the open world, causing them to become significantly more dangerous. It's fairly obvious when this happens, as their eyes start to glow blue and they have enhanced abilities. And it's generally a good idea to set down your campfire at night and rest until morning. And don't forget to throw in some ethereal cobwebs if you don't fancy some nasty surprise attacks disturbing your sleep. Anyway, I hope you found those tips useful. If you did, maybe consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel for more RPG guides and of course other RPG based videos. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.